Okay, so sorry, the video cut off mid-sentence. So what we were saying is, and I just turned it on and I need my pen. Good. So we were talking about this sort of unreal value for the simple past, and we said that we can use the past tense to say that there's this idea of rupture with. We can say that the truth of this thing is not now, right? Which is sort of the basic value for the simple past. And instead of it being a narrative value, which is when we say true, the truth of this thing not now is because it's true in the past. We can say, oh, this is not true now. It's actually true in a hypothetical situation, which is what we have when we say, if I had the time, if I had $5, right? That's a hypothetical situation. It's not, we're not talking about now, right? Okay. So another way we can use this is we can use it in sort of a polite situation. For example, I can say, I could say something like, could you tell me something? A question mark. Here's our sentence. Could you tell me something? Right. So here we notice that we have, well, the verb phrase is going to be could tell, right? Here we have the inversion between could and you, because could is the first auxiliary verb in the verb phrase. So could and tell is the verb phrase, right? Could being inverted with the subject because we have the question. Now, could is the first verb in the first phrase. It's the first auxiliary. It's the only auxiliary, but it's the first verb in the verb phrase. So it is the conjugated one. It is the one that will be in the past, but have the mark of what tense we have. Either, of course, when we talk about tense, we're talking about only two possibilities: the present or the past. Okay, so. And we look at could and we say, oh, I know what could is. The could is our modal verb, and it is the past form of can, meaning it is the past tense of can. So right away we can say, oh, we have past tense. I'll write that here. And now, as far as the time is concerned, there's actually two ways to interpret it. Either you can say the time is the present because now is when you're asking, right? Okay. Or you can say the time is the future because you're asking someone to tell you something in the future. So I would accept it's reasonable to have either to add either present or future. Okay. So once again, we have this rift, or this dichotomy between tense and time here, and once again it's a little bit lighter than our pure. It doesn't have this value of something being non-real, purely hypothetical, as when we say if I had $5. But it is a way, and some people call this tentative use. I can write that down. Some linguists. It's in a sort of rhetorical way. We can say the speaker is sort of playing with this value of saying this is not true now, right? As a way of not insisting too much, in a way of sort of saying I'm not really asking this question, and that this can actually appear as polite, this sort of not being overbearing and not making a sort of overly direct. It's a way of not being direct. That's one way to say it. You're not saying can you, you're saying could you. You're almost saying, well, I kind of want to ask you, but I'm not really asking you. It's, by the way, we do the same in French. Ah oui, je voulais vous demander. On peut dire je veux vous demander, mais je voulais, c'est comme si on veut pas vraiment. So once again, we have the same value. We have the past tense, right? Voulait, or here could, right? Et c'est comme si je ne suis pas en train de vous demander. C'est comme si j'ai une espèce d'écran entre moi et ce que je demande, en l'occurrence. So we can call this sort of tentative use, and it's just another. It's very similar. I mean, of this idea of the using the past tense, and it's not referring to past time, but it creates this almost this idea of sort of unreality, and we're not really saying that the thing is happening. So that's all that we're going to say about this value. This sort of when we have past tense not referring to past time. And now what we're going to do in the second part of this video is we're going to move on to the present perfect. So, you know, a whole new kind of chapter here. And we're going to do, once again, we're going to do this kind of comparatively. We're going to look at, you know, our initial exploration of the present perfect, which you will find on the same document, verb basics, when right below this chart that we spent, you know, weeks looking at, you can find, you know, bottom of page 3, the present perfect in the timeline, and that's really what we're going to talk about, that paragraph. So that this will help you. You can relate these two parts to each other. So we have present perfect versus the simple past. Okay, so let's start with what we know. We've looked at the simple past. Now, once again, we say the basic value for the simple past is rupture. And if you say, and as you said, this is when the past refers to past time, right? As we've seen, that we can sort of say we have sort of a narrative value, and that's the 6th one we saw on the table, right? On page 3, the narrative value. And once again, we said the basic value is, you know, we're saying this is true, not now, right? We're saying it's true, but we're not saying anything about now. And that creates this idea of sort of, we said, rupture with respect to the present, right? That means that something happens at a fixed point. This is sort of on the timeline. This is now what I'm talking, and this is something happens in the past. So I could say, for example, I cut my finger yesterday. And that's, once again, that's just me telling a story. What happened yesterday? So that's going to be a narrative value. And so we can notice we have cut is the past, that's the verb phrase, right? And it is the simple construction, so there's no auxiliary verbs. It is the main verb is the conjugated verb in the simple construction when it's affirmative. And so here we have our past tense of the verb cut, to cut, right? cut. So here we have our past tense, and here it refers to past time. You know, we can write past tense, past time. I cut my finger yesterday. And it's important to see that we're dealing with a narrative context. Notice if I continue, I cut my finger yesterday, and then I went to the hospital. So I had to drive there. I drove there quickly. People, and you see, we have a succession of simple pasts, and we have this idea of we're exploiting sort of what we call the global aspect, and we're just representing these events as a whole, and we're enabled to quickly go from one event to the other because we evoke them in a very sort of simple way, right? We're using, and remember that was really what the simple past does. And what's really important is we're totally cut off from the present, right? There's no reference to the present. And you think, in one way to think of this is narrative value, this is really what narrators do in sort of novels, right? And in traditional novels, right, they sort of mimic. A lot of people say that novels kind of imitate history. And when you write history or a traditional novel, you know, it's like like a novel written by Balzac, who wrote historical novels too, who wants it the whole debate, but you're not, the narrator is not going to talk about him or herself in the traditional novel, right? The present really doesn't exist. And so in this value of rupture, when we're saying this thing is true, not now, what we're saying is we're not interested in the present. We're only just focusing on the past, right? Okay, and that has to do with this basic value of rupture that we explored in the preceding video. Now we can compare that to the present perfect, right? So we'll have a very similar utterance. Here we have I cut my finger yesterday, and I could say I've cut my finger. I've cut my finger, and I could say it's bleeding. I'm going to write sort of a visual representation on the timeline of this. So this is a different kind of a situation. I've cut my finger, it's bleeding, right? Now, this might not be extremely clear, but notice if I say I've cut my finger, first of all, there is no time marker like yesterday that fixes, right? If here when I say I cut my finger yesterday, notice this thing is fixed at a firm place on the timeline, which makes it separate, right? Separate from the present time. And that has something to do with that value of rupture, the not now business, right? Now, if I go back to, now we're going back to our present perfect. First of all, the tense is the present, right? You say tense is the present. Now, the time, you can say it's the present and the past. Why? Well, what you're saying here is, if you say I've cut my finger, you're talking about a past event. Now you do, and then this is why we need to compare these. It might be difficult to, really fully understand this. We are talking about a past event here. Cutting my finger happened before, right? It's not necessarily, and we're not necessarily saying that the thing happened recently, right? We're not saying when. But notice we have no indication of when it happened, but it could have happened, right? Any time before, right? And so that means, that is when we have the present perfect, we have this, what we call this have plus verb en construction, right? That's how we make it. I've cut, right? When we say I have cut, that's the verb phrase. We have plus verb. Cut is the third column on the chart when you memorize in collège your verbs, right? You notice you have cut. I could say it would be easier if you, when we say verb en, have plus verb en, that is what we call often the past participle, and that will be that third column that you memorize. So sometimes it will have the same form as the simple past, as in to cut, simple past, cut, past participle verb en, right? But in other verbs like fall, fell, fallen, right? It'll have this sort of verb en form very often, and it won't have the same form as the simple past, right? So I've fallen off the chair, which, and if I say I've fallen off the chair, you're saying two things. Just like if I've cut my finger, you're talking about the past event, right? But notice you're focused on the present consequences, and you're saying this thing could have happened a second ago. So that means there's this interval. You can say, instead of this sort of thing being fixed on the timeline at a time separated from the present, you're saying this happened any time before, any time up until now, which means that this have plus verb en construction, right, which is the perfect construction, right? When we have plus verb en, meaning here we have here we have the present tense. We have the present with have plus verb en, means have plus verb en just means what we call the completed aspect, which means it's something that happened before. And before is sort of very open, right? We're saying right now it happened just sometime before, and that's why it could have happened a second ago. It could have happened even longer ago, right? We'll study that more in detail, this idea of something happening longer ago. But you can say that now differently from what happens when we have the use of a simple past and we have narration. We'll say, I cut my finger and then I went to the hospital, right? Notice we're not at all talking about the present here. Once again, we're in a narrative context, and we are going to continue talking about this past as if the present doesn't exist. That's really the idea. Now here, if I say I've cut my finger, we're going to say that when we're really more interested in the present consequences than telling the story of it happening. So it's very natural, and this is what's going to very often happen, is this following sentence, when we use the present perfect, will be in the present, because you're really talking about the present result. So notice that this openness, when we use the present perfect, this sort of openness of this what we call this completed aspect, right? Which meaning this thing happened sometime before now. Notice it's sort of open. It could have happened. I tried representing this with these sort of dotted ovals, right? Okay. So we're saying this thing happened any time before now. It could have been a second ago, could have been past, because what the have plus verb en means, right? Any time before, right? So not at a fixed point, but at an interval, and it's very important that the interval comes up until now, because that establishes continuity between the past and the present, right? And the fact that we have this continuity really makes us really insist on the present consequences. And that's why we can say the time is, you can either understand this being past time, because you're saying, yes, this event happened before, but it's really important that you're insisting on the present consequences. And what you really mean when you say, I've cut my finger, you're saying it hurts, it's bleeding, or you're really talking about the present state of your finger, right? That's important. Whereas if you say, I cut my finger, you're not saying anything about, you could have a bandage, but you're not talking about it. You're not interested in that. You're just telling the story of what happened before, totally cut off from the present, right? So hopefully that'll make it clearer. The marks we said in that first video when we talked about this idea of sort of rupture, right, for the basic value for the simple past. So we're gonna that's sort of an introduction to the present perfect, and I think it's best to understand that sort of opposed to the simple past. And we're going to continue, of course, with the present perfect continuous. When we see each other after your week of vacation, I'm going to give you some exercises to do, and I would like to have you practice writing some of these sentences. I'd like to have you, and this will be explained in the coursework, in this the Moodle class for this week. I'll have some, gonna give you exercises and writing work to do. So and that I will ask you to hand in the writing work after the break. But enjoy your pause pédagogique, and I will see you in, I think it will be 2 weeks time. Take care. Oh, 3 weeks time. Take care. No, 2 weeks time. Sorry.